Is there any gender rather than male and female? Hi, I'm William Lagula from Bachelor of Arts in Social Science 2-1, and in this lesson I will discuss to you the 5 sexes why male and female are not enough by Fausto-Sterling. In 1843, Levi Suydam, a 23-year-old resident of Salisbury, Connecticut, asked the town board of selectmen to validate his right to vote as a Whig in a hotly contested local election. The request raised a flurry of objections from the opposition party for reasons that must be rare in the annals of American democracy. It was said that Suydam was more female than male and thus could not be allowed to cast a ballot. To settle the dispute, a physician one, William James Barry, was brought in to examine Suydam, and presumably, upon encountering a palus, the good doctor declared the prospective voter is a male. With Suydam safely in their column, the Whigs won the election by a majority of 1. Barry's diagnosis, however, turned out to be somewhat premature. Within a few days, he discovered that Palos notwithstanding, Suydam menstruated regularly and had a vaginal opening. Both his physique and his mental predispositions were more complex than was first suspected. She or he had narrow shoulders and broad hips, felt occasional sexual yearnings for women. Suydam's feminine propensities, such as the fondness for gay colors, for pieces of calico, comparing and placing them together, and an aversion for bodily labor, and an ability to perform the same were remarked by many. Barry later wrote, "It is not clear whether Suydam lost or retained the vote, or whether the election result were reversed." Western culture is deeply committed to the idea that there are only 2 sexes. Even language refuses other possibilities. Thus, to write about Levi Suydam, the author have had to invent conventions to denote someone who is clearly neither male nor female or who is perhaps both sexes at once. For Suydam, it meant the franchise today. It means being available for or exempt from draft registration as well as being subject in various ways to a number of laws governing marriage, the family, or human intimacy. In many parts of the United States, for instance, 2 people legally registered as men cannot have sexual relations without violating anti-sodomy statutes. For some time, the medical investigators have recognized the concept of the intersexual body, but the standard medical literature uses the term intersex as a catch-all for 3 major subgroups with some mixture of male and female characteristics. The first one is the so-called true hermaphrodites, whom the author called herms, who possesses 1 testis and 1 ovary, the sperm and egg producing vessels or gonads. The second one is the male pseudo-hermaphrodites, or merms, who have testes and some aspects of the female genitalia but no ovaries. And the last one is the female pseudo-hermaphrodites, or the firms, who have ovaries and some aspects of the male genitalia but lack of testes. Moreover, the inner lives of the people in each subgroup, their special needs, and their problems, attractions, and repulsions have gone unexplored by science. The author suggests that the 3 intersex, herm, merm, and firm, deserve to be considered additional sexes, each in its own right. The psychologist John Money of Johns Hopkins University, a specialist in the study of congenital sexual organ defects, suggests intersexuals may constitute as many as 4% of birth. As the author pointed out to her student at Brown University, in a student body of about 6,000, that fraction, if correct, implies there may be as many as 240 intersexuals on campus. Recent advances in physiology and surgical technology now enable physicians to catch most intersexuals at the moment of birth. Almost at once, such infants are entered into the program of hormonal and surgical management so that they can slip quietly into society as normal heterosexuals, males or females. The aims of the policy are genuinely humanitarian, reflecting the wish that people be able to fit in, both physically and psychologically. The word hermaphrodite comes from the Greek names Hermes, variously known as the messenger of the gods, the patron of music, the controller of dreams, or the protector of livestock, and Aphrodite, the goddess of sexual love and beauty. According To Greek mythology, those two gods parented Hermaphroditus, who at 15 became half male and half female. When his body fused with the body of a nymph he fell in love with. In some true hermaphrodites, the testes and the ovary grow separately but bilaterally. In others, they grow together within the same organ, forming an ovotestis. Not infrequently, at least one of the gonads function quite well, producing either sperm cells or eggs, as well as functions levels of the sex hormones, androgens or estrogens, although in theory, it might be possible for a true hermaphrodite to become both father and mother to a child. In practice, the appropriate ducts and tubes are not configured so that egg and sperm can meet. In contrast with the true hermaphrodites, the pseudo-hermaphrodites possesses two gonads of the same kind, along with the usual male XY or female XX chromosomal makeup, but their external genitalia and secondary sex characteristics do not match their chromosomes. Thus, merms have testes and XY chromosomes, yet they also have a vagina and a clitoris, and at puberty they often develop breasts. They do not menstruate, however. Firms have ovaries, two X chromosomes, and sometimes a uterus, but they also have at least partly masculine external genitalia. Without medical intervention, they can develop birds, deep voices, and adult-sized penises. Intersexuality itself is old news. Hermaphrodites, for instance, are often featured in stories about human origins. Early biblical scholars believe Adam began life as a hermaphrodite and later divided into two people, a male and a female, after falling from grace. According to Plato, there once were three sexes, male, female, and hermaphrodite, but the third sex was lost with time. Both the Talmud and the Tosefta, the Jewish books of law, list extensive regulations for people of mixed sex. The Tosefta expressly forbids hermaphrodites to inherit their father's estates, like daughters, to seclude themselves with women like sons, or to shave like men. When hermaphrodites menstruate, they must be isolated from men like women. They are disqualified from serving as witnesses or as priests like women, but the laws of pederasty apply to them. In Europe, a pattern emerged by the end of the Middle Ages that, in a sense, has lasted to the present day. Hermaphrodites were compelled to choose an established gender role and stick with it. The penalty for transgressions was often death. Thus, in the 1600s, a Scottish hermaphrodite living as a woman was buried alive after impregnating his or her master's daughter. For questions of inheritance, legitimacy, paternity, succession to title, and eligibility for certain professions to be determined, modern Anglo-Saxons legal systems require that newborn be registered as either male or female. In 1937, the urologist Hugh H. Young drew together a wealth of carefully documented case histories to demonstrate and study the medical treatment of such accidents of birth. Young did not pass judgment on the people he studied, nor did he attempt to coerce into treatment those intersexuals who rejected that option, and he showed unusual even-handedness in referring to those people who had sexual experiences as both men and women as practicing hermaphrodites. One of Young's more interesting cases was a hermaphrodite named Emma, who had grown up as a female. Emma had both a penis-sized clitoris and a vagina, which made it possible for him or her to have normal heterosexual sex with both men and women. As a teenager, Emma had sex with a number of girls to whom she or he was deeply attracted, but at the age of 19, she or he had married a man. Unfortunately, he had given Emma little sexual pleasure, though he had no complaints, and so throughout that marriage and subsequent ones, Emma had kept girlfriends on the side. With some frequency, she or he had pleasurable sex with them. Young describes his subject as appearing to be quite content and even happy. In conversation, Emma occasionally told him or his or her wish to be a man, a circumstance Young said would be relatively easy to bring about, but Emma's reply strikes a heroic blow for self-interest. Would you have to remove that vagina? I don't know about that because that's all my meal ticket. If you did that, I would have to quit my husband and go to work. So I think I'll keep it and stay as I am. My husband supports me well, and even though I don't have any sexual pleasure with him, I do have lots with my girlfriends. Yet even as Young was illuminating intersexuality with the light of scientific reason, he was beginning its suppression, for his book is also an extended treatise on the most modern surgical and hormonal methods of changing intersexuals into either males or females. Young may have differed from his successors in being less judgmental and controlling of the patients and their families, but he nonetheless supplied the foundation on which current intervention practices were built. In 1969, when the English physicians Christopher J. Dewhurst and Ronald R. Gordon wrote The Intersexual Disorders, medical and surgical approaches to intersexuality had neared a state of rigid uniformity. Consider their opening description of an intersexual newborn. One can only attempt to imagine the anguish of the parents that a newborn should have a deformity. So fundamental an issue as the very sex of the child is a tragic event which immediately conjures a vision of a hopeless psychological misfit doomed to live always a sexual freak in loneliness and frustration. Scientific dogma had held fast to the assumption that without medical care, hermaphrodites are doomed to a life of misery. The treatment of intersexuality in this century provides a clear example of what the French historian Michel Foucault has called biopower. The knowledge developed in biochemistry, embryology, endocrinology, psychology, and surgery had enabled physicians to control the very sex of the human body. The multiple contradictions in that kind of power call from scrutiny. On the one hand, the medical management of intersexuality certainly developed as part of an attempt to free people from perceived psychological pain, though whether the pain was the patient's, the parents, or the physicians is unclear. And if one accepts the assumption that in the sex-divide culture, people can realize their greatest potential for happiness and productivity only if they are sure they belong to one of only those acknowledged sexes, modern medicine has been extremely successful. On the other hand, the same medical accomplishments can be read not as progress but as a mode of discipline. Hermaphrodites have unruly bodies. They do not fall naturally into a binary classification. Only a surgical shoehorn can put them there. But why should we care? If a woman defined as one who has breast, a vagina, a uterus, and ovaries, and who menstruates, also has a clitoris large enough to penetrate the vagina of another woman, why should we care if there are people whose biological equipments enable them to have sex naturally with both men and women? The answer seems to lie in a cultural need to maintain clear distinction between the sexes. Society mandates the control of intersexual bodies because they blur and bridge the Great Divide. Inasmuch as hermaphrodites literally embody both sexes, they challenge traditional beliefs about sexual differences. They possess the irritating ability to live sometimes as one sex and sometimes the other, and they erase the specter of homosexuality.